The year was 1865, and while the East was nursing its wounds from the Civil War, the West remained wild, unforgiving, and vast. Rebecca and Matthew had left everything behind, family, friends, and the bloodstained past, in search of a quieter future on the Oregon Trail. They had dreams of land, peace, and maybe even joy. But the trail didn't care about dreams. One dusk, their wagon rolled into a weathered trading post, a place that looked like it might blow over in the next storm, yet somehow had stood for years. The wooden boards were gray with age. A few settlers watched them roll in, their eyes sharp. The Cheyenne had set up camp nearby. Rebecca felt their silent presence and pulled her shawl tighter. She had only ever heard whispers about them, enough to feel afraid. Inside the trading post, smoke curled low and heavy, mixing with the tension. Men lined the bar, voices clipped, shoulders stiff. It took only a single word, a sideways glance, and then the sound of a rifle cocking. "Get out of here!" someone snapped. A Cheyenne man stepped forward, hands raised in peace. But peace never had a chance. The gunshot exploded, and the room descended into chaos. Rebecca screamed, diving to the floor as gunpowder stung her lungs. Shouts, smoke, splintering wood. And then, Matthew. She saw him lunge toward her, then collapse, blood on his chest, his eyes wide with shock. She crawled to him, cradled his face in her hands. He tried to speak but never made a sound. And just like that, everything they'd built together, everything they'd hoped for, was gone. The wilderness swallowed Rebecca whole. After Matthew's death, she had nothing. Just a bundle of supplies, a battered heart, and the sound of wind rushing through trees that didn't care who she was or what she'd lost. Every step forward felt like carrying grief on her back. Her boots sank into mud, her fingers numb from cold, and still she pressed on. 3 days into the silence, the sky turned dark. Snow began to fall sideways in sheets, biting into her face. The wind howled like something alive, and Rebecca fought to stay upright, stumbling over roots and sinking into drifts. She was about to collapse when she saw something slump beneath a tree. At first, it looked like just another fallen log, but the blood darkening the snow told her otherwise. He was Cheyenne. Rebecca froze. Every story she'd heard screamed to turn back, to run. But something held her there. Curiosity, pity, or maybe just the thought that she couldn't watch someone die again. She approached slowly, cautiously. "Can you hear me?" she whispered. His eyes opened, dark, alert despite the blood on his side. He didn't speak her language, but he didn't have to. His expression wasn't threatening. It was exhausted, human. Rebecca knelt beside him, hands trembling. She tore strips from her petticoat, pressing them against the wound. He flinched but didn't push her away. When she finished, he gave a faint nod. It wasn't trust, but it was a beginning. The next 2 days passed in silence. He couldn't speak her language, and she didn't know his name. But that didn't stop them from walking side by side. His wound slowed him down, yet he didn't complain. Rebecca carried their small bundle of supplies, eyes always scanning the tree line for danger or shelter. When they reached a swollen river, her heart sank. The storm had fed it well. Its waters roared like some ancient beast, frothing and crashing over rocks. There was no bridge, no shallow ford, just wild, freezing water between them and whatever came next. "We can't cross this," Rebecca said, her voice shaking. He didn't answer, but stepped forward and pointed to the far bank, calm and sure. She didn't know whether to call it bravery or madness. Together, they tied what little they had into a bundle, wrapped it tight with rope, and stepped into the current. The icy water bit through Rebecca's boots instantly. Her breath caught as she tried to steady herself. The current pressed hard against her legs and panic surged. Halfway across, her foot slipped on a hidden rock. Her body plunged forward, water closing over her shoulders. She gasped, clawing for balance. In an instant, his arm was around her waist, pulling her upright. They stumbled to the far bank and collapsed together in the mud, breathless and shaking. Her teeth chattered, and she clung to her soaked shawl as the cold wrapped around her. She turned to him, eyes wide. "I thought I was done for," she whispered. He looked at her, lips twitching in the faintest smile. Then, for the first time, he spoke in English. "Strong," he said, tapping a hand to his chest. Rebecca stared at him, too stunned to respond. But something inside her cracked open, not in fear but in awe. He wasn't what she'd been told to fear. He was something else entirely. They moved through the woods in near silence. The sky was the color of steel, the ground still soggy from snowmelt, and each breath curled into the air like smoke. Rebecca walked ahead now, her steps more sure than before, a knife tied at her hip, one Hawkeye had given her. She didn't know how to use it well, but she carried it like a promise. When the sound came, deep, heavy branches cracking, she froze. Hawkeye's hand gently touched her shoulder. "Don't move." From the trees ahead, it emerged. Massive. A bear, brown and ragged from the long winter, its fur matted with mud. It sniffed the air and locked eyes with her. Hunger, curiosity, a quiet danger. Hawkeye moved slowly, pulling his bow from his back. No panic, no rush. Just quiet precision. He knocked an arrow and waited. Rebecca's heart pounded. Her grip on the knife tightened. She thought of running, screaming, something. But her body held still, like she'd been carved from ice. Then the bear stepped closer. Hawkeye released the arrow. It struck the bear's shoulder, not deep enough. The beast roared and reared. Rebecca's instincts snapped. She moved fast, ducking behind a tree as Hawkeye shouted something sharp in his language. Another arrow flew. This one pierced the bear's chest. The animal staggered, let out a final furious roar, and collapsed into the brush with a crash that shook the ground. Rebecca stayed crouched, her breath ragged, her hands shook. "Is this what life out here is like?" she asked, her voice trembling as she stepped out. Hawkeye looked at her, then toward the fallen beast. "Yes," he said simply. The air had turned brittle again. Snow dusted the branches overhead as the two of them walked along a trail carved only by deer and desperation. Their footsteps were quieter now, as if they were afraid to wake something ancient buried beneath the land. Then they saw it. Smoke. Hawkeye crouched low, his fingers brushing against tracks in the snow. He didn't speak, but the look he gave her said enough. Someone was ahead. When the bandits came, they came fast. 3 men, wild-eyed and reeking of hunger. They'd been tracking anyone left alive in this stretch of land, hoping to rob or worse. One raised his rifle. "Hand over what you've got," he barked, "and maybe we'll let you live." Rebecca stepped forward. Her voice shook, but it held. "We don't have anything worth stealing." The man laughed. "Sweetheart, you're the prize." Before he could take another step, Hawkeye moved. Quick as lightning, he knocked the rifle upward. The shot rang out into the sky, useless. The forest exploded into chaos. Hawkeye wrestled one to the ground as another lunged toward Rebecca. She didn't scream. She didn't freeze. She swung a branch with all her strength, striking the man hard enough to drop him to his knees. Her heart thundered, her hands raw. She didn't stop. Not this time. The last bandit, seeing the fire in her eyes, ran. When silence returned, it was thick and broken only by heavy breathing and the sound of blood dripping into snow. Hawkeye rose, breathing hard, eyes scanning for more. Rebecca stood still, trembling. "I never thought I'd be the one to fight," she whispered. Matthew, he'd never have believed it. Hawkeye stepped close, and for a moment there was no past, no trail, no wound. Only her, only him. Morning came slow the next day. They stood at the edge of the forest, where the land began to soften and the rivers ran west. Rebecca stared down the road, eyes glassy. It was time to leave. "I don't want to go," she said, barely a whisper. Hawkeye didn't answer. Instead, he placed a hand over his heart, then gently over hers. No words, just promise. She turned, tears burning her eyes, and walked toward her next life. She didn't look back, but the bond didn't break. Not then, not ever. The trail west was never meant to be easy. For Rebecca, it began with loss, but ended with something more powerful, the quiet discovery of who she truly was. Strength doesn't always roar. Sometimes it walks beside you in silence, and sometimes it looks back at you through the eyes of someone the world said you should fear. So if this story moved you, don't forget to like, subscribe, and tell us in the comments. Have you ever met someone who made you stronger just by walking beside you? Because stories like Rebecca's deserve to be remembered.